Hi, my name is Eileen Koval, and I will be discussing human behavioral interventions for stranger-directed territorial aggression in pet dogs. Probably everyone listening to this episode knows at least one dog on their street, if not more, who has this issue. If they don't have a dog themselves who's a bit territorial and barky and growly at strangers who come by. Dog aggression towards unfamiliar people that occurs on or near the home property is a common issue faced by dog owners and dog trainers in the United States. As many of you may have experienced, dogs sometimes claim territory beyond the actual boundaries of their home, such as the sidewalk or across the street into the neighbor's property, and they may react when people enter those spaces. These aggressive behaviors can be due to a multitude of factors, including human factors and factors inherent to the dogs themselves. Dogs displaying territorial aggression may have strong genetic factors predisposing them to fearfulness, anxiety, or guarding behaviors as a result of purposeful human-selected breeding. Perez-Guisado and Muñoz-Serrano described in their 2009 research study how humans sometimes choose dogs specifically for these territorial behaviors when they bring them into their home. They may like the way the dog looks, big and tough, or they like the idea of the dog keeping certain people away from their property. Then they ignore or sometimes even reward the barking and growling at people who come near the home. However, they may later become surprised when the aggression is directed towards unintended people. According to veterinary behaviorist Dr. Lori Hogue, in her 2008 research study, a lack of appropriate early socialization during that first year of life can result in neuroendocrine changes that correlate with fearfulness and aggressive behavior that we see. Dr. Hogue's article, as well as Heron et al.'s 2009 article, described that maternal stress during early life, hormonal issues, and illnesses can all result in increased fearfulness of strangers and overreactions to environmental changes and the aggression that we see. Fearfulness is a welfare issue for dogs in and of itself, since it decreases the quality of life of the dog. However, when fearfulness in a dog is manifested as aggression towards strangers, then it becomes a much bigger problem with potentially serious implications for the well-being of both the dogs and their owners too. According to the Animal Legal and Historical Center, owners of aggressive dogs may endure issues with local authorities, as well as economic damages from lawsuits and victims' medical bills. This is something more people are worrying about nowadays with the litigiousness of modern society. I've had many clients mention that people made claims against their homeowners insurance for territorial aggression dog bites. As for the dogs themselves may face owner relinquishment. Owners saying, I simply can't handle this behavior anymore, and then giving them up to a shelter. They may also be seized by local authorities, or they may be euthanized. This makes it imperative that owners take territorial aggression seriously and seek intervention as soon as it appears before the behavior intensifies and before it becomes well practiced. The types of interventions that owners and trainers attempt to fix this, they're widely varied. A 2024 study by Johnson and Wynn found that 57% of owners use traditional approaches that cause fear and pain to the dog to try to suppress these aggressive behaviors or more or less make them stop. This can include a wide range of techniques from yelling, pinning dogs down, snapping the leash, or hanging dogs from a leash in the air or using shock collars. These techniques have been promoted by popular social media trainers, such as Cesar Millan, who had a TV show, to try to curb aggression. Probably most of you have seen his show or have seen him on TV. Similarly, a 2026 research study by DeLue and Williams found that 54% of trainers who work dog behavioral issues utilize aversive methods. Conversely, though, a 2020 research study by Vieira de Castro found that dogs subjected to aversive training showed more behavioral signs of stress, higher cortisol stress hormone levels, and a pessimistic outlook both inside and outside of training scenarios compared with dogs who engaged in only reward-based training who didn't have those signs of stress and didn't have those high cortisol levels. Unfortunately, 75% of the owners included in Heron et al.'s 2009 research study had tried physical corrections first before seeking the help of a veterinary behaviorist because those things didn't work for them. The do-it-yourself interventions included leash corrections. Sometimes people kick the dog or hit the dog, shock the dog with a remote collar, or jab them in the neck. Overall, 25% of these dogs displayed immediate aggression to their owners in response to the physical corrections. That's not a small number. The American College of Veterinary Behaviorists published an official letter condemning the use of aversive physical and psychological punishment during training. They warn that these training methods are inhumane and increase the risk of immediate and future aggression, as they found in that study. They recommend exclusively reward-based methods to address the dog's emotional state and teach new behaviors around visitors and pedestrians near the home. These aversive behavioral interventions compromise the dog-human relationship, create fearfulness, and increase the likelihood of immediate and future aggression towards strangers and the owner, as they saw. Dogs will have a hard time feeling safe around someone who feels like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, where they don't know which version they're going to get. Are they going to get the loving and the safe one, or the one who makes them feel afraid and in fear for their safety? Education may help trainers and owners to understand the reason for dogs' aggressive behaviors and how they can help to positively change this in a way that preserves their dog's welfare. A 2015 research study by Range et al. Found that described that territorial aggression is highly common in wolves, who can display intense aggression towards non-pack members who venture into their pack's territory. They also described, though, that territorial aggression is actually uncommon in feral and free-roaming dogs who may live in large groups, but they don't show physically damaging aggression towards each other. However, as most of you have probably seen, territorial aggression is common in some modern dog breeds that are bred specifically for territorial guarding or aggression towards strangers. These aggressive behaviors can create serious challenges, with the behaviors being incompatible with living in busy urban and suburban environments. People frequently pass by or visit the dog's home property, and this triggers stress for the dogs and the aggressive behavioral outbursts that we see. As I mentioned earlier, dogs sometimes claim and defend territory that goes beyond the boundaries of their actual home property. No one except the dog knows where that invisible boundary lies, and this can be highly problematic if dogs get loose from the home property, like if the pool guy or the gardener leaves the back gate open. The territorial behaviors that dogs choose to exhibit can also vary widely, but the most problematic ones are the ones that could cause bodily harm to someone. Veterinary behaviorist Dr. Kenneth Martin described that the goals of these behaviors is to deter an intruder from accessing the property. Bottom line, they're not deliberately just trying to harm someone if it's territorial. What they're trying to do is get that person off the property. And these behaviors can include tensely charging towards a stranger, lunging, muzzle punching, or biting the person. So the behaviors for territorial aggression aren't necessarily harm, but it can include physically harming somebody. Dogs who are experiencing illness or pain, they can have chronically high stress levels that are going to inhibit learning as we try to teach them different behaviors. So the stress that impairs learning can come from the individual themselves, or in cases of illness or pre-existing pain conditions, it can come from the surrounding environment, or it can come from the training experience itself. Issues in the surrounding environment could include stressors like training in a busy environment, training in an environment with scary noises like angry barking dogs or loud motorcycles speeding nearby, or noxious odors that bother the dog. Stress can come from the arrangement of the training itself, including if the training scenario is simply too challenging, or if it feels frustrating to the dog and unachievable to get that reward. The training scenario could also be stressful if there's fear or punishment involved as part of the training. If the dog's unsure what the human wants them to do because of unclear communication, then that could cause stress. Internal stressors that inhibit learning can include health issues like hormonal issues, for example, thyroid issues or Cushing's syndrome. It could include acute pain issues like horrible itching or discomfort from skin allergies. There could be chronic pain that can cause stress, like intervertebral disc disease that we see in some longer back dogs, or arthritis pain. It could include gastrointestinal issues and food intolerances that can cause serious pain and discomfort, amongst other health issues. It can also include serious anxiety-related issues. According to veterinary behaviorist Dr. Laura Hoag's article in Veterinary Clinic Small Animals Practice, under-socialization is the most common reason that healthy dogs display aggression. Xu et al.'s 2023 research study found increased amygdala connectivity in anxious dogs. The amygdala is that fear center of the brain. and there were strengthened connections between the amygdala and the thalamus, the hippocampus, and frontal lobe, all of which are anxiety neurocircuitry. The amygdala identifies danger in the environment and signals other parts of the brain to initiate a fight-flight response. The immediate threat response, the sympathetic adrenal medullary axis, that's the SAM axis, and then possibly the longer-term threat response system, the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, the HPA axis. Both those short, immediate, and the long-term, possibly the long-term threat response engage when a fearful dog sees a stranger approaching the home property. According to De Silva et al.'s 2021 research study, severely anxious dogs may have impaired learning abilities due to their high stress levels because that affects proper cognitive functioning. These dogs have a high baseline anxiety level throughout the day, even when nothing is happening that should cause stress. This can make it difficult for them to respond appropriately when a visitor comes to the home, even with training to teach new behaviors. It's imperative to address the chronic anxiety first, including any underlying health conditions that may be causing it. Ozel's 2024 research article describes how the HPA axis, that longer-term threat response and stress response, how it engages when an individual is faced with a long-term stressor, resulting in high levels of cortisol stress hormones circulating in the bloodstream and the tissues. That excess cortisol binds to glucocorticoid receptors, which are largely situated in the hippocampus and the hypothalamus. This results in decreased connectivity between the information processing areas of the brain, including the mesencephalon and the hippocampus, that can detect and remember rewarding stimuli, rewarding contexts, events, and locations. These high prolonged periods of distress actually change brain connectivity in similar ways to what I mentioned earlier about under-socialized dogs, with fear dominating the way the brain reacts. These dogs experience increased activity in the fear center of the brain, the amygdala, and strengthen connections between threat signaling pathways. Given the prolonged stress with strengthened anxiety neural circuitry, things in the environment that the dog sees, smells, hears, or feels, they can become predictors of negative emotional events that they will remember and react to later on. For example, a dog can become fearful of their leash or their harness, going on walks, or a certain park if they experience the sound of a car loudly backfiring while on their walk. During distress and high emotional arousal, the brain preferentially memorizes these negative events, so only negative emotional learning occurs, and it's occurring during these periods of intense stress known as distress. As both Ozel and De Silva mentioned in their research studies, dogs simply cannot learn new behaviors effectively when their stress levels are intensely high, either chronically or situationally distressed. They simply, neurophysiologically, they cannot memorize the new information, and they will not be able to recall it effectively in future events. Only the negative emotional arousal and things related to it are memorized. So it's imperative to reduce stress levels through counter-conditioning procedures first. By counter-conditioning, I'm talking about pairing something pleasant, like the dog's favorite food, with the presence of something the dog is fearful of. Eventually, the scary thing becomes less scary since it predicts the appearance of something rewarding. This is essential with highly stressed dogs. We want to change how they feel first, and then they can effectively learn both these new emotions and the behaviors we will teach. Some people may be familiar with highly stressed dogs where every training session seems like the dog has never learned the behavior before, and you keep having to teach and reinforce the same thing again continuously. I describe it to my clients as that Adam Sandler movie, 50 First Dates, where they act like they've never seen or never done this before. Stress levels need to be low or moderate, not distress, so that dogs can be guided to good choices and then actually remember them later. These low to moderate stress levels will allow their brain to save this learning for future use. Entering a training session at a low to moderate stress level will also allow them to recall their previous learning. If stress or arousal levels are too high, they may seem to forget their previous learning. Mild to moderate stress is called eustress. Basically, it's good stress that enhances learning, like what we experience when we're solving a puzzle for fun. High levels of fear or stress will cause negative emotional learning to occur. It will block proper memory consolidation and retrieval of previous learning, which keeps the dog from continuing to learn and progress. There are various methods used to address territorial aggression in dogs, spanning from reward-based to aversive methodologies that we discussed a little bit about earlier. Let's take a look at some of the common methods and break down the basis for the behavior, how it affects the dog biologically, and the long-term effectiveness and welfare outcomes for the dog and the humans involved. An aversive method commonly used for territorial aggression is owner-activated remote shock collars. People like to call them electronic collars, but what it's doing is putting a shock through the skin and into the muscle. And this is likely used because the dog is further away from the owner, so they may be unable to physically correct the dog through any other means than something remote. When a dog notices a person passing by the home or entering the property, the trainer or owner wait for the dog to perform the wrong, undesired behavior of barking, lunging, charging, or growling. Then the human presses the remote button on the collar to send a shock stimulation through the tissue and muscle in the dog's neck, eliciting a very painful sensation. Schilder and Vanderborg described in their 2004 study of German Shepherds trained for police work that the dogs frequently elicited a high-pitched yelp, a screaming bark, and sometimes jumped against a handler if they were nearby when stimulated with a shock to the neck. The pain of the shock sensation is felt by the nociceptors, or pain sensors on the skin surface. This pain response is sent through the peripheral nervous system to the central nervous system, and then noradrenaline is released by that SAM axis, that immediate threat and stress response system that we were talking about before. And this pain response activates the dog's reflexive response of yelping, jumping against the owner, and stopping their movement towards a stranger. This is very similar to when you touch a hot surface and you pull your hand back and you're not even thinking about it. Your body's just doing it. It's reflexive. The objective of these trainers is to force a dog to stop the behavior they do not like through the positive punishment quadrant of operant conditioning. But what they're really doing is more classical conditioning. So the behavior will not, it will only continue if the dog associates seeing a stranger entering the property and worries that they're going to experience this painful sensation again. So while many people say they're doing the positive punishment, they're punishing the behavior, but what they're really getting is a classical conditioning of the stranger with that painful shock. And the behavior will only hold if the dog continues to associate it with that. Bouchard and Serrano described in their 2024 research study how pain activates the HPA axis. That's that longer-term stress and threat response we were talking about. So the pain of the shock will result in a neuroendocrine stress response. Rather than their emotional state being eased, the dog has high levels of cortisol circulating in their bloodstream during the shock collar training, which was also found in Vieira de Castro's 2020 research study on aversive training methods. The fear center of the brain, the amygdala, and the threat neural circuitry experience hyperactivity, and negative encoding occurs of environmental stimuli and context as possible predictors of future threat of the shock. Unfortunately, dogs will likely remember not only the presence of a stranger being paired with the pain of the shock, but they will possibly remember the presence of the owner as predictive of the shock. This is unintended classical conditioning occurring in which the dog is attaching negative emotional associations to various stimuli and possibly contexts and environments. This could increase the likelihood of fearful and aggressive responses in animals in the future who undergo this training, as well as increasing their anxiety levels outside of training as they may associate the electronic shock with their owner, their home environment, and other stimuli and contexts. This reduces the dog's overall well-being and quality of life while also increasing the risk of future aggression, as was seen in the studies that we mentioned earlier. This is not an appropriate method for behavior modification under any circumstances. An alternative method to address territorial aggression is through reward-based training, utilizing classical conditioning and operant conditioning procedures. Veterinary behaviorist Dr. Kenneth Martin described at the 2017 Small Animal Veterinary Congress how it's important to address the emotional state of the animal, so the dog will not act defensively based on fear. And then once that emotional state is addressed, then teaching new behaviors around the presence of a stranger when the dog is less stressed and less fearful. This would include counter-conditioning the presence of passerbys by verbally exclaiming, "Good," and then presenting a tasty treat when the dog, who was kept far away on leash on the sidewalk, happens to notice passerbys who are not directly approaching the property. This keeps things low intensity, starting first at a distance. I would do this repeatedly over several short 5 to 10 minute sessions until the passerby no longer evokes a stress response, as evidenced by a loose, wiggly body seen on the dog. The stranger becomes a predictor of valuable food reward and triggers the release of dopamine and oxytocin due to this repeated pairing with food and social interaction with the owner. Worth's 2015 research article showed that oxytocin is important to dampen fear and dampen adrenaline so that positive learning can be committed to memory. Then we can begin working on positive reinforcement operant conditioning by teaching the dog to make a desirable behavior choice and then rewarding it. One way to do this would be to have the owner verbally call the dog to come when they notice a stranger enter the property. And this is after we've already done the emotional change from earlier. The dog would need to start far away from the stranger initially when starting this training. And then the owner would reward the dog with a jackpot of high value rewards coming to them, giving it one piece after another after another. Gong et al.'s newly published study just in the last month, in I believe in June, maybe it was in May 2026, showed how food jackpots increased dopamine responses and accelerated the rate of learning. With repetition, the sight of a person will become a predictor of a jackpot reward and an environmental cue for the dog to find the owner. In conclusion, this behavior modification supports the animal's learning because the hippocampus will store positive memories of these training sessions with the reduced stress levels and rewarding experiences. The hippocampus will communicate with the striatum and begin to slowly reassign the presence of a stranger as no longer being threatening, but instead a positive stimulus associated with reward. Behaviors will change when the dog no longer feels threatened by the stranger's presence. Additionally, the animal will cease aggression once they learn behaviors that work to ensure their safety through avoidance that also provides significant value and reward. The aggression primarily occurs due to fear and an attempt to gain control of a perceived threat. It is a goal to not have animals living under constant command, but instead to give them autonomy. This is far preferable, in my opinion, compared to managing the situation with covered fences and having animals locked away every time guests come over. Obviously, in some situations, that may be necessary due to safety, but definitely not every situation. And the goal is, if we can, to give autonomy. Many animals experience significant distress hearing visitors on the property, but being unable to interact with them, essentially a barrier frustration, which most people are familiar with through seeing dogs fence fight. Frustration can lead to future increases in arousal and aggressive behavior when approached by an owner or a guest, or if the animal is released from the space but still in a high arousal state from frustration. The objective should be to help the animal feel calm and empowered instead of trapped without regard to their emotional state. The best choices for long-term solutions are those solutions that improve animal welfare by increasing the dog's autonomy while providing training and feelings of comfort around a social stimuli. I hope this was helpful, and I really appreciate you listening to this episode. Thank you so much.